Hi, good day, everyone. Well, it could be good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. But welcome to all of you. This is the first of the Middle East HSE and sustainability events for 2021. The topic today is sustainability, energy, and COVID-19. How can we all make a difference? Okay, my name is Trevor Stockbriggs. I'm the Managing Director for Energy Institute in the Middle East. I'd just like to give a little background to the Energy Institute and what we do. Okay, for some of you, obviously, will be members, some may not. You'll be part of our broader network. So just for obvious promotional purposes, I'll let you know, the EI, it's a unique interdisciplinary network of 20,000 people, 20,000 individual members, and 250 companies working in all parts of the energy system worldwide. And over 50 of those companies are here in the Middle East in one form or another. We're an independent space for evidence-based collaboration and a link between academia and policymakers. This, as I said, it's the first event of 2021 for the Middle East HSE and Sustainability Week. Our host is Bahrain Petroleum Company, and the HSE Forum. It will be in a two-part event. The HSE Forum is endorsed by the National Oil and Gas Authority, and the sustainability part of the event will be hosted by the Sustainability Energy Authority of Bahrain. For the whole event running over the year, we've got 5 HSE and sustainability related webinars, which will be run by us out here in the EI Middle East, or from the Middle East, mainly featuring people who are on our board and technical experts from this region. There'll be 4 also run, which are basically leaning towards our technical guidance, and they'll be organized by our UK events team. So basically, there'll be 1 a month running from now on through to October. And then in November, there'll be a 3-day HSE and Sustainability Week conference at the Wyndham Hotel in Bahrain between the 21st and 23rd of November. We're really hoping and keeping our fingers crossed that this can be a full face-to-face normal conference event. That's not possible for coronavirus reasons. It will be either a hybrid event or a totally digital event. Whatever happens, it will be a 3-day event between those days. We have a lot of subjects for our webinars, very interesting subjects. The first one is, as I said today, sustainability, energy, and COVID-19. How can we all make the difference? And this is followed by energy careers in conversation. Then we have resilience out of crisis, the role of HSE in building a sustainable recovery. This will actually be an interview with His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Khalifa Al Khalifa, who's the Minister for Oil from the Kingdom of Bahrain. Then followed by risk management challenges and solutions in a COVID world, and fire protection to solar power plants, and design approach to renewable energy systems. And this will be infilled with 3 or 4 others, as I say, leading towards our technical guidance. The big event will be the actual conference in Bahrain, and we hope that the people attending today will be able to attend that event physically or digitally, one way or another, but we do recommend that you book your place when that's available, and it'll all be available through our EI website. Our patrons, we're very fortunate to have some very highly ranked patrons. Obviously, His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Khalifa Al Khalifa, who's the Minister for Oil for the Kingdom of Bahrain, and His Excellency Dr. Abdul Hussein bin Ali Mirza, who's the President of the Sustainable Energy Authority for Bahrain. I'd just like to introduce our speaker for today. It's Rami Osman. He's an energy efficiency specialist with the UNDP, and he's working with the Sustainable Energy Authority in Bahrain, and he's also one of our board members for the Energy Institute in the Middle East branch. He's currently working on the implementation of several initiatives under the National Energy Efficiency Action Plan for Bahrain. He's been involved in energy management as well as research and development of energy conservation measures including pilot studies for energy efficient lighting and cooling technologies. He's got over 10 years experience in energy and education, and some of his current projects are Green Building Rating Scheme, National Strategy for Electric Vehicles, Waste Heat Recovery pilots, and enabling frameworks for EE and RE projects. So therefore, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Rami, and we look forward to your presentation, Rami.
Thanks very much, Trevor. I appreciate the introduction and setting the stage for this webinar and the rest of the events leading up to the HSE and sustainability sessions later on in the year. I'd just like to ask if you can hear me clearly, Trevor?
Yes.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. He said, hopefully. Right. So as Trevor has introduced, today we're going to be talking about sustainability, energy, and COVID-19, particularly how we can make a difference to the energy transition. So I'm going to speak towards energy transitions in general, a little bit of background on them. Then I'm going to talk about COVID-19's potential impact on the energy transition that we're all so keen on pursuing at the moment. We'll look at demand growth for energy, and then a clear need for an improvement of energy efficiency. I'm going to discuss a little bit Exergy versus efficiency, and then a few technology gaps that we can look at closing together as kind of a global team. And then, time permitting, I'll look into a case I'm fairly familiar with, that is the approach of the Kingdom of Bahrain towards this transition, and then hopefully we'll have some time for a few questions. So in terms of energy transition, I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who doesn't have some knowledge as to why we are aiming to transition towards more sustainable energy systems. And it's, mainly down to environmental impacts. The proxy that's used most frequently is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So obviously this is correlated with human impact on climate. So the energy system for quite a long time has been, I don't want to say vilified, but has been attributed as one of the leading contributors for greenhouse gas emissions, and obviously this proxy of CO2 emissions. But this is something that can turn around. Obviously, being one of the major contributors, it can also step in and be one of the major solution providers. So obviously transitions are very complex, but a lot of people question whether or not it can be done. And I'd like to just bring up this graph here. This is just one country taken as an example, and this is several energy transitions that have happened over a period of time, moving from traditional biomass as the primary source of energy towards coal, and finally towards modern fuels, oil, gas, the hydrocarbons used for generating electricity and so on. So it is complex, but it can happen. Again, this is just one country, and there's a few indicators as to how long it's taken. And then the question is really, what would it mean for each of us? And the answer to that question varies depending on where in the world you are, what kind of carbon intensity, energy intensity there is in a given country. And this graph, again, using the proxy of CO2 emissions, this graph shows how many emissions there are per person per year in given countries. Now, it's very different for each country, and this is obviously built upon how carbon intense the energy system is, also how large the energy system is, and the type of activities that are going on there. So depending on where on this graph you might find yourself, what it's going to mean for you to transition to a more sustainable future changes in respect to where you sit. For example, some of the countries over on the right-hand side, lower down on the graph, they're in positions where they can leapfrog technologies. They can actually skip from very carbon intense energy sources to much less carbon intense and benefit from the learning that's been done across the globe. Others with more established energy systems, increased complexity, those countries are going to see more of a transition. And because they're more established and complex, the transition could potentially take longer. Thankfully, they are also considered more developed countries. So in theory, the development doesn't need to be limited for the countries over to the right, those that are still developing, if we leapfrog and transition appropriately. So I promised when we were talking about this that I wouldn't talk about flattening curves, because I think we've all heard an awful lot about that. But obviously, COVID-19 has had everybody transitioning from normal to the new normal, from business as usual to post-COVID business as usual. So again, the pandemic obviously has been a terrible, terrible thing that we've all had to adapt to. But to try and take some silver lining from the pandemic, the question I pose here is whether or not it can be used to accelerate an energy transition. Now, in the previous graph, we saw different periods of time used to transition from one source of energy to the next. And here, this is quite an old piece of research, but again, this indicates a given country's transition from coal to oil to natural gas. And we can see on the far right that modern renewables is at the very beginning of entering into the energy mix in this country. And the global mix is very similar. So in regards to how long it might take, we can actually see that these transitions are taking longer. The base there is 60 years across, and essentially 50% was achieved for the transition to coal. In that 60 years, only 40% was achieved when transitioning to oil, and then let's say roughly 25% to natural gas. So these transitions are slowing down, and a part of that is because the initial energy demand of the countries is met by the original or the, let's say, the incumbent fuel source. So this doesn't bode well for renewables trying to come in and transition to a big market share. There is, however, quite a few differences. What likely drove these transitions to date has been price, quality of service, very little focus on any kind of existential threats or the impact of the next big thing, which we discussed in the last slide, was kind of climate change and the impact we're having on the environment. So I think that as none of us had heard really of COVID-19 at the start of the pandemic, nobody would have foreseen that in no time at all we would all be transitioning as much as we had. Things like the vaccine or the several vaccines that are being rolled out across the globe now were not even thought of at the time. So we've come up with them. We've shown how as a community, the globe can work very, very quickly, can be very flexible if given a common target. And we've been able to achieve, frankly, miraculous results in very little time. So this gives me hope that faced with an existential threat, as we were with COVID-19, faced with climate change and a new focus, I do have hope that we can actually speed up the transition. Now, something that I want to make very clear is that I don't think that coal, oil, natural gas, fossil fuels are going anywhere. In fact, if we are going to keep up with the growth in demand, we will certainly need those fuel sources. But I'm going to discuss that a little bit later. In terms of demand growth, we've got a growing population globally. We've got huge development happening across the globe, and the general march is towards an increased standard of living in developed countries and globally. But traditionally, we can see that this has had a negative impact on carbon emissions, again, as a proxy for greenhouse gas emissions. So this graph here from the IEA shows a couple of things that we can achieve when there's focus. So the marked instances are obviously not necessarily positive things, they're all negative things. However, the impact of these negative things has been positive towards the environment. So the Great Depression, we saw a drop in the emissions. World War II, a drop in emissions. The oil crisis, a drop in emissions. The financial crisis. But most recently, obviously, there's COVID-19, which has had the most dramatic drop. And again, that's related to all of the social distancing measures, the rolling lockdowns that we've seen, and the drop in production, essentially, and energy demand. Now, the hope is that in the recovery from COVID-19, that this doesn't necessarily have to go back up. When I say this, I'm speaking specifically towards the carbon emissions and those things which carbon emissions are being used as a proxy for. So the financial crisis, we saw a recovery from the financial crisis, but we also saw quite a significant increase in emissions. So the hope is that we can transition to sustainable energy and manage to reduce the rebound effect on CO2 emissions and other emissions. So I think in order to do that, we've got to improve energy efficiency. There is no rate of transition that I can think of, no technology waiting in the wings to step in quickly enough to supply enough energy, whether it's solar, wind, geothermal, any of the renewables. None of them appear ready to step in and instantly supply the demand needed to transition entirely away from fossil fuels, which is why I state again, I don't think that is what is going to happen in the short, medium, even considerably longer term. So what we're going to have to do is curb demand. This Sankey diagram, again, not new, but this is something that really frustrates me. So if we look on the left-hand side, primary energy into the system is the big blue bar. 100% of the energy went into the system. Take it as a kilo of coal. At the first conversion, this is where that coal is turned into secondary energy, in this case electricity. 65% of the energy that was in that original kilo of coal is lost, and that's lost to the atmosphere. We know it doesn't get destroyed, but it's heat that goes out of the exhaust stacks at the power station, and other losses within the system. Another little red arrow that comes out next is in transmission. That's another 1.5% of the energy, another 2% at the distribution of the electricity, another 0.5% at the wiring within the home. And when it gets to the light bulb, now this is a conventional light bulb, a tungsten bulb most likely, another 28% is lost. So 3% actually arrives at the lamp as useful energy. It's then too bright, so we pop a nice lampshade on top of it and we cut down another percent, and we end up with the illumination only taking 2%, 1% of which is lost because we're not even in the room. So in terms of efficiency, this is pretty abysmal. And that is quite upsetting for a lot, considering the effort that's gone into retrieving the coal and delivering it as a useful energy service at the end of this diagram. And the associated externalities, the emissions associated with that coal and producing that energy service. So of course, we could look at this quite negatively. On the flip side, all of these red arrows, whilst at the moment they represent losses, they also represent opportunity to improve the efficiency. So if we can focus on this, we can bring down the amount of energy that is wasted. That means that even when we transition to more sustainable or lower emission fuels, we won't need as many. So many will have heard about the quality of energy, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, and the fact that renewable energy is not quite as dense as the fossil fuels that we've come to rely on in our energy systems. I apologize, the resolution on this isn't great. I wasn't able to get a better version of this diagram, but here I'm going to talk a little bit about exergy versus efficiency. So when we talk about energy efficiency, we're talking really about how much energy we put into a system versus how much work we get out. And that's energy efficiency. And as I said earlier, while energy can't be destroyed, it's only converted, and we lose parts of that energy in those conversions, as I said, to heat and all those red arrows that dropped off the bottom of the Sankey diagram. Exergy is another aspect, and this is obviously the second thermodynamic efficiencies that we talk about. And obviously, Exergy can be destroyed. So this is the potential work that you could do with a given fuel. So when we talk about the energy conversion, let's look at the left-hand side of this diagram first. Oil furnaces being used to heat homes. The fuel that goes in is converted, and we get about 85% out of the oil furnace as usable heat to heat the home. That doesn't sound too terrible, especially when you compare it to that lighting scenario, but still, we've still got quite a loss. When you think about the exergy, the way to think about this is the energy that was lost in the conversion is out of the system now. It's been vented or lost through friction or wherever. That's no longer in the system, and you can no longer do useful work with it. So the heat in the room is what you've achieved. When we think about the exergy here, the fuel that is being converted is resulting in an exergy efficiency of only 4%. Why? Because we can't do much work with that heat that's in the home any longer. So while the fuel efficiency wasn't terrible, the exergy efficiency was quite bad. Moving over to the next potential technology that can do the same job, which is an electric heater. Again, electric heater is far more efficient, energy efficient. You could argue as high as 100% because there aren't really many losses involved. So the heat, in terms of energy efficiency, is produced at a much lower energy input. So that seems great. But again, if you look at the exergy, that heat is still not very useful. It's heated the home, yes, but we couldn't then apply it to another working process. So again, in terms of the energy efficiency, the electric heater is much better, but in terms of the exergy efficiency, it's only 1% better. Looking at the next potential technology is a heat pump. Now, heat pumps are really interesting because they use a little bit of energy to do some work, and they actually collect further energy from the environment to produce the end goal, which in this case was heating, but they can be reversed to cool rooms as well. So in this instance, it's got a fantastic energy efficiency, and it's got still not an amazing, but a much better exergy efficiency. So in comparison to the top two technologies, oil furnace to heat, electric heater to heat, the heat pump has a much higher, 3 times higher than the next best technology, exergy efficiency. Now, this is the kind of thing that we need to consider when we talk about transitioning. Moving towards a sustainable energy future, we're going to have to look at things like this: bringing down overall demand, reducing the losses in the systems, and also finding where we're using our fuels and making sure that we're using the appropriate fuel with the appropriate technology to deliver the end service that it is best suited towards. So this really becomes an issue when we look at technology gaps. Looking at the levelized cost of energy in US cents of solar in the region, this is in the Middle East region, there's been a huge reduction. But that still doesn't mean, I mean, 82% from 2015 to 2020 is quite a massive reduction in cost. But it's not just about cost. There's other issues that we need to close in terms of technology gaps. And there's huge amounts of work happening in this. So when we look at solar as the example I've put here, you've got intermittent. Solar isn't around at night. So there is a technology gap that needs to be closed. And that's related to either storage of that, if you're going to go completely off-grid or island-based, or it's about learning how to synchronize those renewables with other sources of energy that do function at night. Perhaps hybrid systems where solar and wind work together. The other issue is obviously density, and this comes back to the quality of the energy again. You know, certain regions are blessed with a huge access to prolific resources for renewable energy, but realistically, most places will not have the land space to be able to collect enough energy to meet demand. Again, that caveat to that is unless we reduce the energy demand, reduce the intensity of the businesses we do, reduce the intensity of our day-to-day activities in terms of energy demand. So while the cost comes down, other things are still there that are roadblocks. Storage needs to be looked at. The density issue becomes more evident in certain areas. So when we talk about the harder to transition sectors of the economy, for example, transport, there's not much space on the roof of a vehicle, of a car, let's say, to put a solar panel. We've seen a few, but they're not overly successful over the long term. So that's where we look at storage. And that's where things like other technologies like hydrogen are being looked at to solve those issues. Accessibility, where we might have adequate renewable resource, we don't necessarily have much demand. So learning how we can move it around efficiently is really important. And then also considering the end use of any energy source. So hydrocarbons, fantastic quality energy, extremely dense, relatively simple and straightforward to transport. It's what we've built our energy systems on today. But the Exergy efficiency of using it for very specific things, for example, burning to generate heat, is extremely poor. The Exergy efficiency there is terrible. We're much better, as we've seen in the example, using electricity to provide that end energy service. The efficiency of all of these things needs to be considered. So these technology gaps need to be closed. So I want to move now to look at a given transition. As I said, the transition that I'm most familiar with is that of the Kingdom of Bahrain. And as Trevor mentioned earlier, the Sustainable Energy Authority is kind of spearheading that transition within the kingdom as part of the government. And it's got two main objectives. One is to increase investment and utilization of renewable resources, and the other is to improve the efficiency of the energy system and promote conservation. So again, it's those two aspects, and this is happening around the world. The reasoning behind it and some of the focusing events, as there were, are the international commitments, Sustainable Development Goals, particularly goal number 7, but as we know, they are all essentially interlinked, and improvements in one goal really does translate into improvements in the other. So ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. Bahrain is also committed to the Paris Agreement, so a commitment to reduce that the greenhouse gas emissions, and it's contributed first and now second nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. And again, that's that proxy of carbon emissions and the other host of greenhouse gas emissions, which all have an environmental impact. And then regionally, the League of Arab States, Arab Ministerial Council for Electricity, has required that national renewable energy action plans and national energy efficiency action plans are developed by each member state. Now, in November 2014, again, if we think about the period of time that we've looked at for other transitions, this is not all that far back. In 2014, the Kingdom of Bahrain partnered with the UNDP to man a center called the Sustainable Energy Unit. And again, that really was an example of how the world can work together, leaning on other countries, leaning on best practices, experiences from around the world. Working with NGOs is a way that obviously these transitions can be sped up. And again, leapfrogging through mistakes, leapfrogging through technologies is possible when we work together. So the Cabinet approved in December of 2013 the establishment of a centre, and that was manned by the UNDP, again with the two targets of increasing investment and use of renewables and improving energy efficiency and conservation. Some targets were proposed and approved then in 2017. A 6% improvement in energy efficiency by 2025, and that's based on a baseline period. And a 5% contribution by 2025 from renewable energy sources into the energy mix nationally, which increases to 10% by 2035. So to give you a bit of an idea, because I'm sure many won't know the size of the energy system in Bahrain, that's talking about roughly 250 megawatts by 2025 and 710 megawatts by 2035 from renewable energy entering into the mix. So getting there, as we've seen with sustainable development across the globe, how you get to sustainable development or sustainable energy is something that can be approached differently by different groups. And as a result, it was recommended that a national action plan be adopted at the highest level. And that lines up with the regional requirements as well. But these two action plans were developed and adopted in 2017. They were approved in 2016. They're 70 pages each. And in the interest of time, those 70 pages have been condensed into 2 slides. So the first slide is about the National Renewable Energy Action Plan, its policies and projects. So again, the targets are up there, 5 and 10% in the energy mix by 2025 and 2035 respectively. So some enabling policies. Net metering, prior to the development of net metering, there was no opportunity for people within Bahrain to generate their own energy for self-consumption. So if you wanted to install renewables, that was very, very difficult. And there was no legal way to then connect those renewables to the national grid. And that's where things like the intermittence come in as an issue. So if you've got an off-grid system, you are really on your own to generate enough energy for all your activities, or at night, you're going to have to switch over to the national grid. Net metering allows for the generation on site of renewable energy for residential, commercial, and industrial purposes to meet your own requirements. So obviously the idea is to then reduce the cost of that if you can develop those renewables at a lower price. And there's the knock-on impact of reduced emissions associated with your energy demand. Another policy is to combat essentially the lack of available land in Bahrain, which is a relatively small island, quite densely populated. The government had to be a little bit smart with the way it was siting these plants. So a policy was developed to develop all the rooftop buildings that are owned by the government. To do this by attracting private investors. So it's a build, own, operate model. Again, no cost to the government. And through a tendering process, you get competitive bids for the development of the rooftop. And in return for allowing the private sector to develop the rooftop of government buildings, the government gets preferential tariffs. So The third one, which is currently underway, is a renewable energy mandate for new buildings. This is only optional at the moment. The mandate is not in there, but it's been incorporated into a green building code, whereby a percentage of the energy demand of the new building should be addressed by renewables integrated directly into its design. So in terms of projects, there's the solar system for government buildings. Again, over 300 buildings were assessed and they've been parceled off, and the first parcels have actually been tendered out. Financial closure is imminent at this stage for a series of plants. Solar systems for new town developments and housing projects in coordination with several ministries, particularly Works and Housing. The design and provisions have been incorporated into the design of new housing developments, particularly social housing, so that integrating solar into them is much simpler. Industrial renewable energy initiatives, the main contribution so far to renewable energy in the kingdom has actually come from the industrial sector, whereby industrial facilities have all started to develop their own independent solar power stations. There's a large-scale solar farm, which is to be sited on a landfill, which is being remediated, which should contribute 100 megawatts. There is a waste-to-energy strategy, which falls under the National Waste Management Strategy. Again, this looks at converting municipal solid waste. This looks at sludge treatment and other opportunities for waste-to-energy. Obviously, onshore and offshore wind farms, and for that matter, floating solar, are also being looked into, and the integration of renewable energy systems into public projects and infrastructure projects such as causeways and large facilities such as the airport. So all of those should lead towards the target of 5 and 10% of renewables into the mix. Now, again, 5 and 10% isn't going to transition entirely the economy. So we need to also rationalize the amount of energy and improve energy efficiency. To do that, there are 22 initiatives. I won't talk to all of them, but what I want to highlight on this slide is the sectors that are addressed. So the target of 6% by 2025 will result in savings. This is after the expense of actually implementing the initiatives, of 230 million Bahraini dinars, roughly 500 million US dollars per annum, just in savings to the government. So there's other savings associated with this. To achieve that, you've got to address all areas of the economy. So buildings, this is green building initiatives, improved cooling technologies like district cooling, implementing minimum energy performance standards, basically outlawing those poor Exergy systems where you've got really poor conversion efficiencies. Then you look at industry. The industry program is tailored to each and every part of the industry that happens here. So large energy consumers will all have their own plans in place, but this was really about facilitating them to develop them. The government, as I've mentioned, government buildings have started looking at renewable energy generation, but there's no point in generating renewable energy and just throwing it out the window. So energy management programs, green procurement, conversion of government-owned infrastructure like the street lighting has all been pursued. In terms of transport, this is where, again, you can improve the minimum efficiency. You can look at the subsidies that were currently there for fuels, again, to incentivize people to transition to more efficient vehicles. And most recently, we're also working on an electric vehicle strategy towards promoting the use of electric vehicles, again, because they have a higher they have a better use of fuels that are being put in there. So in terms of the Exergy well to wheel or turbine or solar panel to wheel, they have a higher efficiency. So we're looking to promote those. Obviously, the electricity system, in terms of electricity supply, is one of the major consumers of energy. So production efficiency was looked at, transmission and distribution. Again, these are the red arrows that we saw coming off of the Sankey diagram earlier. Power factor correction and smart metering. I'll link back to COVID-19 here. Working together, all these parts of the economy can work together and achieve this target very, very comfortably. Smart metering, the reason I link back to COVID-19, when we first found out about COVID-19, we heard time and time again, testing is important. Knowing what's going on is important because then we can react appropriately. Smart metering to me kind of is the linchpin for all of these because it generates for us data to inform future policy. So this is the same at home. This is the same in your offices. We want to keep an eye on where the energy is going, what we're using our energy for. That will help us to decide where we might be able to use it smarter and conserve. So that's the linchpin for me. And then there's these ones at the bottom, cross-sectoral. So energy subsidy reform, very similar to the fuel subsidy reform. This is looking at the electricity subsidies and again, taking the subsidy more towards the real cost of energy and electricity. Awareness and information sessions like this and many others. Again, no energy system can do this without its consumers. So all transitions now need to involve the end consumer because at the end of the day, things like demand side management, where we ask consumers to consume at different times of day to rationalize their consumption, they will not work without awareness and the democratization of the information around the energy system. And then the last one here was institutional infrastructure, and that was really the development of the Sustainable Energy Authority as opposed to the center that started out in the SEA. So the impact so far on the National Energy Efficiency Action Plan has been pretty good. When we look at the actual peak load in terms of megawatts in 2017, when the plan was launched, it was 3,527 megawatts. That's peak load being supplied. And there was a projection at the time that there would be a 6% increase in the peak load each year. So the projection was that by 2018, we would reach 3,786 megawatt peak load based on the projections of the energy system at the time. And this was a consultational effort to arrive at that number. But because of the implementation of the initiatives, we were able to reduce that. And we ended up at 3,437. And this is on the very worst day of the hottest month, obviously because the cooling load here is one of the main drivers of energy demand. And then in 2019, the projection was that we would reach 4,013. Again, that's with that 6% increase. It didn't happen. We were able to have a very small jump to 3,443. And again, the latest figures are not on here, but we still haven't yet, in 2020, we still didn't reach that first threshold of 3,786, which we expected to reach in 2018. I can tell you that the peak demand of 2020 was in June, and that was only 3,662. So there is growth, and there's been growth in the economy, but in terms of energy intensity, we've been making quite a big impact. Again, this can't be done alone. All transitions take people, so training is vital. Obviously, because of COVID-19, a lot of the training has been moved online. As of 2019, our last physical session was in December of 2019, where we had trained up to 314 people to install renewable energy technologies. 264 passed and certified, and these are people joining the efforts to go out and develop renewable energy and work on energy efficiency. In April of 2019, we launched with the University of Bahrain a renewable energy lab, again, to build that research into opportunities and improving renewables and their use and energy efficiency as well. And in September last year, a master's degree was launched in renewable energy engineering, which we supported the development of. Obviously, all of this development is going to take a huge amount of human energy and also financing. So we've worked with local financing, the leading banks and the Labour Fund to arrive at a financing support system for sustainable energy projects. Again, this is a way really to raise awareness, the awareness of these projects, because without proper understanding of the type of projects that these sustainable energy projects are, financiers find it very difficult to believe in them and understand the bankability of them. So there is a lot of work with the financial sector. As I mentioned earlier, we are working on renewable energy certificates. The idea here being that, understandably, because of power density issues, because of access to space issues, there are many who would like to use renewable energy but might not have the space in their facilities or on their own land to generate it. So this is a system by which the SEA verifies generation of renewable energy and allows the trade of the attributes. This is still under development. It will be launched publicly and available for people to use hopefully sometime this year. Again, looking at the access and the availability of renewable energy resources. For those not familiar, this is a map of Bahrain and its territorial waters. And we can actually see that the very best wind resources, based on the wind atlas that was developed, are quite a way offshore. So this is where we need to work on establishing good spots for renewable energy, work out transmission efficiency trade-offs, and really understand where the renewables need to be sited, and if there's demand nearby them, so that we can reduce transmission losses and things along those lines. But we can see that there's rich resource that can be tapped, and frankly, the wind resources are enough if we were to reduce the energy intensity to drive the economy. How do we reduce energy intensity? Again, it's those 22 initiatives, labeling of air conditioning and mandating minimum energy performance. Same thing true for lighting, mandating, especially leading by example in the public sector, governments transitioning first. Smart metering, obviously this is something that we've already spoken about. The Green Building Code, again, mandates good use of building technologies, sustainable development of buildings, because at the end of the day, these buildings that we're building today will have quite a long lifespan, and we need to make sure that they're using the resources in terms of energy and water effectively. Again, looking at centralized services to offer higher efficiency in cooling, which is one of our key demand drivers. Things like district cooling can improve the efficiency dramatically, over 30–40% improvements in some instances. The electric vehicle strategy, again, by working together and engaging all of the stakeholders, we can bring down barriers that stop this, and we can learn from mistakes. In the Sustainable Energy Authority, we engage with the diaspora across the globe, including the Energy Institute and other partners, to understand what's going on. Without awareness on these things, without being experts on these things, we need to work together. So these are a series of different events that we attend and work towards. Again, it's about raising awareness, democratizing the knowledge around the energy system and the transition. Folks have already heard about the HSE and Sustainability Week that this webinar is part of the lead up towards. IP Week is another event that the Energy Institute will be running in February of this month, 23rd to the 25th, another great opportunity for people to hear more about the energy system. We can see the tagline there, from crisis to low carbon opportunity. Speaks very much towards what I've spoken about today. And another event, kind of on the national regional, this is the International Sustainable Energy Event, which the SEA is running on the 23rd and 24th of March. So with all of these opportunities to learn more, I now hand back over to Trevor for questions and answers. I hope that was useful to some people.
Thank you very, very much, Rami. Yeah, you touched an awful lot of bases there. There are a number of questions that have come in. One is sort of very close to my heart. 25 plus years ago, I was working in the Philippines and we were doing demand side management programs. Yeah, at the time, nobody was interested in that management. I have to say, now people are. And one of the questions that's coming from Mutasim Noor of Harriet Watt is, how do you see between is doing for energy generation and transmission, etc., the physical side versus reducing our usage of energy. Is there a percentage on that? Is it 75-25, or what? Do you have any ideas?
I think it depends massively on the energy system itself, but I think everybody needs to come to the table on this. When we look at the global spread of emissions and which countries are emitting what and where they are in their specific energy system development process, it's really difficult to say. Governments certainly can and should be leading the way, but they can't do it without the citizens. And this is actually something in sustainable development across the board. This has been a transition over decades. So traditionally development across the board was very donor oriented, right? So donor countries were donating to the developing countries and showing them the way to do development. And that has really transitioned, much like the energy system has to transition to realize how complex energy is. At the end of the day, the energy system can't do it alone. It needs all of the people at the end of it to be working towards the same goal. So as development transition to really incorporate the people that it was for, the beneficiaries. So instead of this one-way road of developed to developing, it's now the community, and we can see that in the SDGs. So in the Sustainable Development Goals, we see that energy is interlinked with all the other development goals, and as a result, we end up with these much more comprehensive, and the ownership of the projects is much more spread out. So the end user can buy in, and the end user can say, oh, I will turn on my dryer in the evening as opposed to when the peak is on. I will avoid using all of these appliances at the same time. Why? Because I realize that I'm part of this energy system and I'm needed, and my efforts are required in order to support the system to reach this end goal, which at the end of the day is for the global good.
Yeah, great. Miraj, what is the value of the energy audit towards more efficiency, energy use?
Yeah, the first question was close to your heart, Trevor, and this second one is close to mine. I started off my energy career as an energy auditor, and I think it's massively valuable. Just like the smart meters, the way an energy audit contributes here is by highlighting opportunity. So an energy audit will basically take a person through their home, an organization through their facility, an industrial processor through their plant, and identify where energy is going and how much of that energy is being used usefully and how much of it is being wasted. Now, the idea isn't to show people up and say, oh, you should have changed those light bulbs years ago, you should have maintained that motor back. No, the idea is to indicate where things can be done better, where the efficiency can be improved, and that directly results in lower costs for energy. So if we can improve efficiency, if we can change technologies to improve Exergy, we can reduce costs, we can reduce the environmental impact, we can improve the socioeconomic benefit of that energy use. So it can result in more comfortable homes, cheaper to run homes, more comfortable offices, cheaper to run offices, and more efficient, both in terms of energy and capital, industrial processes to produce things better. So the knock-on aggregate effect is improved energy efficiency through energy audits, and the implementation of the recommendations that the audits result in will have a knock-on impact in improving the GDP of a country. So yeah, they're vital. It's worth noting, and I kind of touched on it just a second ago, an energy audit alone won't save you very much. It can save you a bit because there are low cost and zero cost initiatives. You know, for example, oh, by the way, you should probably turn the cooling down a bit, or you can turn those lights off at these times to these times. So those are free. But in general, you might need to invest a little bit in some of the recommendations that are made through the process of the audit.
Yeah. It's a little program called Energy Aware, and it's basically an animated sort of questionnaire, light bulb going on, make people think about things to do in their home and their office, and you can run through this thing, in 10 or 15 minutes, and there's a Q&A at the end of it, and it's a great little tool just for making people think. Exactly one of the things you said, turning the thermostat down a degree, to not down a degree, higher, so the temperature is higher, and so the aircon is not burning away. And all of those little things add up. But I think what you're saying is it's not one individual at one end of it, and it's every single piece in the spectrum of energy, yeah, from the government to the utility, to the transmission, to the user, et cetera, et cetera. There's no one single thing.
Absolutely, and by neglecting any one, you're neglecting huge opportunities. By saying we're not going to bother with that, you really are losing out.
Yeah. Another interesting thing is obviously this year, COP26, is that going to have an impact? We hope so, but do you think it's going? Are people just going, well, that's just environmental stuff, Is it? I don't know.
I hope that the lessons that we've learned from COVID are many, and I hope that what we realize is that we are part of the global system, and as in any system, when it's not in balance, it will try and put itself into balance. So if we don't take care of the system which we rely on, at the end of the day, all of our energy comes from the environment, all of it. Whether it's a fossil fuel that's been compressed over millions of years, or it's a fresh electron that we plucked out of the atmosphere, it all comes from the environment, and there is always balance in a system. So we need to look after our system. At the end of the day, we're taking an awful lot from it, and we're putting an awful lot of negative things into it. We need to strike that balance. We need to see now the linkages between energy and the environment, between what we do on a day-to-day basis and what we hope. And again, this is my favorite definition of sustainability, is one that was kind of published in 87. What we aim to do in sustainable development is to be able to meet the needs of current generation without jeopardizing the opportunity of future generations to meet their needs. So it comes along onto these things of, we haven't inherited our world and this environment from older generations. We've actually borrowed it from future generations. So we need to act accordingly. That's the way I feel on this matter.
Well, I think, Rami, we're just about on time, 3 minutes. That's pretty good in these days. I think that summation of that definition of sustainability is a good one, and something that we can all think about. It's no one thing, and it's not in the past, and it's not present, it's in the future. It's a whole linkage of everything. And that's the thing, I think, to make everybody think that there's no one thing. It's everything is interconnected in every way, whether it's the human body, It's the guy, it's the animals, it's the plants, it's the sea, it's the energy we produce, the efficiency we lose, which are massive. According to some of your previous slides, they're frightening. Yeah, the amount of loss in that transition from one piece of energy to another. Yeah.
So something maybe just to reduce anxiety on that particular slide. The advent of LEDs has improved the efficiency so much. Yeah. I did use the tungsten bulb as kind of I wanted to open people's eyes, because we were happy with that for how many years. But look, Trevor, I really appreciate you having me on, and I hope people found it useful. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thanks for all your presentation together. Thank you to everyone who's listened in today. And if you have any more questions, please do let us know later, and we can answer them in the future. And this has been recorded, so if people didn't get a chance to watch it, or you want to pass it on to one of your colleagues, there will be a recording of it that's available in a few days. So thank you very much to Rami. Thank you very much everyone who participated. And good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whichever way you are. And we look forward to having you in the next Exergy and sustainability, in about a month's time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Trevor. Bye, everybody.
Cheers.